Morning, everybody. Happy day 3 of my migraine. And welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's assistant editor, Jason Beattie. Morning, Jason.
Morning, Susie. So about your headache?
Well, it's not a headache, it's a condition. Anyway, it's the People's Pay-Per-View. Get into the comments, ask us your questions. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to keep voting for Nigel Farage to eat testicles in the jungle, won't you? So, what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on an astonishing story that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, has been fueling inflation himself by raising rents on privately rented flats he owns by 18%, the chiselling little creep. More on that later. But first, I want to remind you all about the school's rack crisis. The fact that hundreds of schools aren't safe because they have roofs constructed with concrete, which tends to crumble when it gets wet. And the maintenance and rebuilding programme went the way of the dodo back when the Tories took over 13 years ago. Now, nothing has changed with rack. But Jason, it turns out there's something else to worry about now in schools, which is asbestos. I mean, WTF, Jason, why is there asbestos in schools?
Well, this isn't new either. It's just, so we've known about this for some time. I think the alarm was raised actually a good 10 years ago, if not before then. I was looking into this morning. I remember something about since 2017, 150 teachers and classroom assistants have died from conditions related to asbestos. It's really quite serious. The government knows there's a problem with asbestos in schools, but as our story reports, you know, they sent out a survey and near 1,000 schools have failed to respond. Now, why is the first question. If this is a problem, and this is a problem which is a fatal problem, i.e. it's killing people, it's putting lives in danger, you would think the schools would want to respond to this. Now I'm surmising here, Susie, it may not be the case, but do you think there may be academies which are not responding to this survey? It doesn't make clear.
Yeah, and it may be sort of
be responsible for the maintenance of school buildings on their watch, or do you think they're more interested in pursuing profits? I have no idea. I mean, I'm just
maybe, but also there's this issue, isn't there, that if you die of something like mesothelioma, which is a very rapid and very incurable form of lung cancer, when you do get diagnosed, sometimes 30 years after, it takes you very quickly. The payout for the head teachers' families, or the teachers' families, the staff who are affected, is also going to be comparatively massive, because asbestos deaths do get big compensation. So, I mean, this is going to cost academies or the DfE or someone as well. It's surely in their interests to get it nailed, or not nailed it, take it out.
So, but like the problems with RAC, the crumbling concrete, as we call it, this can be traced back to the fact that since 2010, the Conservative government halved capital spending on schools. So instead of rebuilding schools, as Labour was doing, they cancelled Labour's school rebuilding programme. Michael Gove, the Education Secretary at the time, said, "Oh, it wasn't efficient. It wasn't good value for money." I mean, that was just piffle. I mean, basically, they were introducing austerity, and they didn't want to go press ahead of these plans. So they then cut the funding for school rebuilding. But the current backlog for school repairs is in about 11 to 12 billion. And the consequences of that are now being felt today. So you've got kids being taught in temporary buildings. You've got schools which still contain an asbestos risk. And I think it's about 214 schools which are affected by RAC at the moment. And this is all back to the problems when somebody called David Cameron was Prime Minister. And what happened to him?
I don't know. He's gone very quiet of late, isn't he? Now, what do you think, everybody? Are you worried about asbestos in your kids' schools? Have you got children that are already off school or having their learning disrupted because of the RAC crisis? God knows what's going to happen if they ever find out people do respond to this survey and tell them, we haven't got RAC, but we have got asbestos. So what we've got here fundamentally is more than 1,000 schools, which is potentially 700,000 children, probably 10,000 staff may be affected, but they're not responding to this survey, which doesn't sound really truly definitive of there definitely being a problem in 1,000 schools. But, the reasons why a head teacher wouldn't respond to a survey like that, Jason, are probably too damn busy. 37 other surveys I've got to do. I'm more worried about the rack and the concrete is about to fall on the kids' heads rather than the asbestos, which is sort of safely boxed off somewhere on the wall, or the fact that all the surveyors who can do this kind of stuff are busy doing the rack at the moment. And, this is the inefficiency, isn't it, that Michael Gove was surely trying to get rid of, which is that you can't fix these things because the system, the machinery is just...
Well, there was no money there which to invest in improving school buildings. And the consequences of this are, one, as we discussed, is that the risk to people's lives posed by either dangerous buildings collapsing from wreck or by asbestos. But the other major consequences is the disruption to children's education. Now, Rishi Sunak gave a speech in the new year when he said education was the main reason why he went into politics. That's his overriding thing. That's what he cares about more than anything else.
Oh, it's definitely not inheritance tax then. Right.
The one thing that the Prime Minister is not doing is actually putting money into school buildings so children can get the education they deserve. There you go.
Well, the one reason he's in then maybe is to stop it happening. Who knows? But it does say here in this copy, it says the Public Accounts Committee, which has uncovered some of these figures, the Parliamentary Committee, which looks into efficiency and so on in government departments, has found that the Department for Education still doesn't know how many surveys on RAC are outstanding either. Now, do you believe that when you've had this kind of crisis, everyone's giving attention to it? Surely you know how many were posted or emailed out, and therefore how many have come back. It's not difficult. Is it possible, do you think, they're just not saying because the answer is embarrassing, because there are schools who haven't responded yet because they're too busy juggling other knives?
I mean, it could be a case of kind of getting bogged down in bureaucracy. It could be a case of computer says no, but actually what you could really do here, if you're a government department, you could actually go out and you could order the schools to give you this information. It is possible to say there's only, about 22,000 plus secondary schools in the country. There's not, we're not a massive number of them. You could just go out to them and say, look, give us this information now. It shouldn't have to be kind of a voluntary kind of ad hoc basis. It is at the moment. That's a bit I just don't understand.
Yeah, it's a fairly simple spreadsheet as well. Isn't it? One civil servant at the DfE could just ring round them all and go, have you had the survey? Have you done the survey? What's the reason for not doing the survey? Thank you very much. Put the phone down again. I mean, it's not too hard. Yeah, wanting to tell the Public Accounts Committee that makes me very suspicious. Yeah. I don't quite believe that. Now, let us know what you think, everybody. How do you feel about your children going to school? Do you think they're safe there? Are you worried about asbestos? Are you worried about RAC? Do you think that it's actually going to be fine, or do you think there's just going to be another crisis around the corner? And how on earth are we going to find £11 billion to rebuild everything that hasn't been rebuilt over the past decade? Never mind the hospitals, never mind the public libraries and swimming pools and potholes, and oh god, let's not go into it. Right, on to the main story of the day, because there is someone who's managed to find a way to grow the economy. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor of the Exchequer since last year, and the man who's in charge of bringing down inflation. But the only economy he really seems to have been working on growing of late is his own. Now, Jason, can you take us through this story a bit? Apparently, being a millionaire businessman and 150 grand a year politician isn't enough. He's also got 7 buy-to-let properties.
This is worth going right back to the beginning on, Susie. So Jeremy Hunt bought these, but he's one of the richest men in the cabinet. He's not quite as rich as Rishi Sunak, but then nobody is. But he's still worth several million. He bought these properties for a company which happens to be a Tory donor, because obviously you do. All above board. He then forgot to declare that he bought 7 flats. He said it was an honest mistake.
Oh, right.
I don't know about you, Susie, but if I just happened to buy a few houses, I think I might remember doing it. But obviously, when you're that busy or that wealthy or that dedicated,
so much money, I forgot where I put it.
I forgot where I put it. Anyway, very honest mistake. It was an accounting error. So then he declared he had these buy-to-let properties.
Oh, those flats.
Yeah.
Right. Those ones we want.
Because we all do. We just forget that we have so many houses. It must be difficult to keep track of them all. So then he corrected the error, this very honest mistake, as he called it. And now an investigation by the campaign group led by donkeys has discovered that some of these properties,
very rich donkeys.
yeah, some of these properties, the rent has gone up by 18%. Now, just to be, because we have to point this out, but Jeremy Hunt says all the profits from these rentals go to charity. He doesn't say which charity or how much goes to charity, but he says it all goes to charity. Well, there he is now.
He always strikes me as looking like a surprised duck.
Yes, doesn't he? Yeah.
He's got kind of the bill look to his nose, unfortunately, and the eyes always sort of tend to boggle a bit. He looks a bit surprised by everything that's happening around him. Now,
he just found out he's got some more properties. He's just like, oh my god!
I have no idea. Am I rich? You never said. That must have been an accounting error.
Now the bigger picture here, of course, is actually 18% is quite impressive. The average rents in the last year have gone up by about 6%. Why have they gone up? Primarily because of Liz Truss's disastrous mini budget last year, which sent the cost of mortgages through the roof. We're all paying. Anybody who has a mortgage or is now renting as a result of the landlord having a mortgage is paying the trust premium of about £200 extra a month because of this. And the other reason why rents have gone up, which means predominantly young people can no longer afford to get on a housing ladder, are paying a disproportionate amount of their income in rents. There's a massive shortage of rental properties, which is driving the cost up. Like, they're getting, on average, each property gets like 1 in 20 people for every viewing. They can't even guarantee they're going to get it. The landlords are completely got the upper hand on all of this. It's because this government has failed to build enough houses.
Now, what do you think, everybody? Has your rent gone up? Are you privately renting? Has your landlord suddenly said he wants an extra X% on the rent? Because why not? Have you found yourself competing for a rented property and having to bid to pay more than the actual advertised rent, which was what I was astonished by. Whenever I was renting a few years ago, it was a case of, the rent is this, and you have to find a way to meet that rent, not that you had to bid like you were buying a property. It was astonishing. There would be an auction about it. Now, the flats were rented out, right, and these are sort of in a luxury marina development in Southampton. So they're not people that are, for example, students trying to get in here. But obviously, if someone at this level is bidding for a flat and paying X much, it does affect the rest of the market going down as well. Everyone has to pay a bit more. Mike says the number of innocent oversights, which surprisingly benefit the Prime Minister and his ministers, is surprising, but also not that surprising. No, if only there were some rules on public accountability in life and principles and morality that they could ever sign up to. That would be handy, wouldn't it? Now, so these flats were on the market at 1,700, and then the tenancy changed or whatever, and then they went back on the market at 1,850. That was what they were advertised at. But then there was a bidding war with various tenants so desperate for a place to live in, because, as you said, Jason, they're going along to look at somewhere. Sometimes they're bidding before they even get to go and see it because it's gone straight away. There was this bidding war, and eventually Jeremy Hunt's company there eventually accepted an offer of £2,000 per calendar month, which is 300 quid extra or 18% more, almost double the rise of inflation and 3 times the average rise for rents last year. Now, Jason, I suppose firstly, wouldn't he say, if he had the guts to do it, look, this is the tenant's fault? Almost, they bid for this. That was the price they felt able to pay. Who am I? In fact, would any of us have said, no, please pay less for the thing I am selling you? We would all have said, thank you very much, wouldn't we?
I mean, he could be that rare thing of being a fair and honest landlord, but I mean, what this story encapsulates more than anything else, and the reason why people should be so angry about it, is that our housing system is completely and utterly broken, and we are denying people the chance to own their own home, and a whole generation is unable to get on the housing ladder and is having to pay rents, which, as I said earlier, are taking up a disproportionate part of their income, which actually is to the detriment to the rest of the economy, because they're not spending on other things, because all the money they have basically goes on rent. And the ones who are lucky here are the homeowners who are seeing their house values go up and up and up. They are then using that capital to buy second homes, sometimes for their children, but often to make more buy-to-let properties, which again is using up the very, very scarce supply of housing we have anyway. And at the same time, all this problem is taking place. So basically, housing has become a group of the elite and the wealthy. Yeah. At the same time this is taking place, the Tories are not building enough homes, and they tried to introduce new planning laws, and it got shot down by their own backbenchers because they refused. The NIMBYs won. And if you want to know where almost all problems start in this country, they start with housing, and they start with people like Jeremy Hunt being able to afford 7 additional properties.
Never mind the constituency house and his London townhouse, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's got a Downing Street flat as well.
Yeah.
So that's 10. Yeah. That's 10. All in.
Well, and Paul says it's called supply and demand. No, it's not, because there's not enough supply. That's the problem. There's plenty of demand. Yeah. Yeah. In an equitable system, you do have supply.
And part of the reason why Jeremy Hunt's, Paul's got a point in a way. I'll try to say Paul Ivanchak, maybe is how you pronounce it. He's got a point in a way, because part of the reason there is no supply and therefore an increased demand where the Chancellor can his company can benefit by charging more is because the rent reforms and landlord reforms, which the Conservative government have made it more difficult for some people to be private landlords. Therefore, they are kicking their tenants out using the no-fault eviction rule, which has not been reformed despite many promises, and it's going to Airbnb, which is more profitable, or they're putting it on the housing market, and they're not having these long-term tenancies anymore, and therefore there are fewer places to go. So when you do find somewhere that's on the market, you're having to bid at an auction to pay the rent. You're having to say, yes, I'll take it before you've even looked around it and seen it. You're finding that it's snapped up by the time you have been to see it. And that's happening in cities and towns and villages all over the country. And because of that, because of the way the Conservative Party, the Conservative government has managed private landlords as an issue, is why the Chancellor of the Exchequer has just been able to charge 18% more for what is probably a two-bed flat in Southampton.
Yeah, I don't know. This affects so many people. You've got young people in their 20s who if they've been born 30 years earlier, would be able to now be put a down payment on a mortgage, but are still living in shared accommodation because that's all they can afford. My nephew and niece, they've both in work. They've had to give up their rental property, because they can no longer afford the rent and move back home with my sister. This is so common. And then that's even before you scratch the real social inequity, which is the problems of people living in damp and appalling accommodation, which they have no choice but to live in because there's not enough decent homes. Yeah, and everybody's health, that has impacts on people's mental health. It has impacts on their ability to find work. This is the biggest problem in this country. As I say, everything comes back to housing. And the one thing we aren't doing is building enough homes. What
the government will say when Jeremy Hunt makes his autumn statement, perhaps, if he does bring in his much heralded and talked about and predicted cut in inheritance tax, is look, this enables people to pass on the wealth in their homes to their children so they can buy their own, and it will ease the housing crisis, Jeremy Hunt would say, if we cut inheritance tax. But that's only for 4% of people, isn't it, Jason?
Yeah, and the Institute for Physical Studies, they ran the numbers over inheritance tax. I don't think it may not be going ahead now. I think even the Tories realised it would be kind of cutting taxes for billionaires is a problem. As you say, the main beneficiaries of inheritance tax are actually those already with a large amount of money.
Yeah,
So
it's Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I understand people wanting to pass on a nest egg to their children, but this is, we're talking here, but the people it affects at the moment, you have to, a couple has to have assets at over £1 million. That's in Jeremy Hunt language, that's about 4 of his flats. And
at least 4, depends on whether the price of those going up. Now, what do you think, everybody? Do you think that there's a problem with the rental system in this country? Do we need to do something different? What do we need to do? Does it go back to Thatcher and the buy-to-let boom? Not the buy-to-let boom, sorry, the right-to-buy boom, which got rid of an awful lot of social housing. There was a story only, I think, last week. I think it was Islington Council or someone is spending £80 million buying back properties they have previously sold because now they need them again. Lisa says we need to build more council housing. Not everyone can afford to buy property, and not everyone can afford private rents. You need to have some kind of system of rents which is affordable for people. Otherwise, of course, the Conservatives just complain about housing benefit, but that's all going to private landlords too. But the other thing, sorry, James.
Lisa's absolutely right. We do need to build more council housing. And actually, one of the problems behind all this was actually the right to buy. Was that they sold off council houses without the receipts went to cut taxes by the Tory government. They did not go back into rebuilding housing. The houses which were sold off, the majority of them ended up in the hands of private landlords. And surprising number of Conservative MPs, amazingly.
Yes. Now, Mike says this goes back to Thatcher introducing the right to buy, forcing councils to sell all of their housing stock and preventing them rebuilding, pushed houses into the private sector. Yeah, you do. You sold off lots of houses. Maybe you build 1 or 2 sheltered accommodation somewhere, and that's all they can really get away with. Now, the other thing, I suppose, is that Jeremy Hunt might say if he was here, and let's try and be fair to the surprise duck, who seems to be running the country, if these were bought with a buy-to-let mortgage, and we don't know, but if they were bought with a buy-to-let mortgage, the previous Chancellor, of course, Kwasi Kwarteng, might have done an awful lot to put the interest rates up on those mortgages. Is it possible that if Jeremy Hunt has mortgages on these flats, perhaps they also rose precipitously, and this rise, therefore, just merely covers the increase in costs? Would that be a justification for it, do you think?
Oh, I mean, you want me to defend Jeremy Hunt, Susan?
I'm just trying to be even-handed, Jason. Trying to find a way to compare to the duck.
I'm sure he's a very nice duck when he's in circles in his little pond.
I think you probably get Ed the duck for another country.
7 duck houses, which he's probably forgot to declare.
Yes, his duck houses in Southampton, all with a nice view of the seaside. Now, of course, I very much doubt that anybody's mortgages have risen by quite as much as the rents have risen in this particular issue, I suppose is the correct answer. So he does seem to have been chiseling some kind of profit out of the tenants for anything else. Now, as we've said, Hunt's defence really is that all the profits from his firm go to charity, but of course that's still not okay because it's coming out of someone's pocket and still fueling inflation. And it matters because Hunt has been urging pay restraint and refusing to pay out for demands from the unions for more pay for the NHS, across the public sector, teachers and so on. That's why I've had the strikes. Fundamentally, it's because the Chancellor has said no to all the ministerial heads of department who've had to go out and say and refuse pay rises people. He said that would fuel inflation. He said pay restraint was the only thing that would stop that being locked in. But surely if he's putting his rents up 18%, his tenants more likely to be making a pay demand from their boss, whoever it is, to cover it. And so it's the rent fueling inflation, especially if there's no reason for it to go up and it is all pure profit.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better. I mean, this is exactly the problem. He's part of a vicious circle, which is kind of hurting our economy.
Well, it's not him on the end of the vicious circle, is it? He's at the happy end of the vicious circle, but then again, it does create problems for himself because he's got to find a way to bring down inflation.
I mean, mortgage costs go up. Landlords put the bills up for renters. Renters therefore need more money because their wages don't cover it. They demand more wages. That fuels inflation. I mean, but 18%, that's unnecessary.
Yeah. Putting it up, the average would probably be wise, I'd have thought, when you're a politician, because you're bound to have someone come and go through your public accounts. It's a bit sticky. Now, here's what Jeremy Hunt has said about inflation. And that's, of course, anyone doesn't quite get it, the amount by which things go up in value every year. So paying 10p for a sweetie this year, paying 15p for the same sweetie next year, and the sweetie has become smaller. So he said in October last year, we're going to have to be asking for sacrifices from everyone to get through a difficult period, including 300 quid for my tenants, which will go in my pocket. In December, he wanted pay restraint in the public sector. The government has a concern not to lock in high inflation. He said, we have to be careful not to agree to pay demands that have the opposite of the intended effect because they lock in high inflation. Didn't say we don't have to agree to rent demands, of course, because he's fine with those. This is the kind of thing where, I don't know, where what you do and what you say, I mean, he's literally making his own life harder for himself, isn't he? Because he's making the job of Chancellor more difficult. If he's pumping this kind of, just in Southampton alone, it will be increasing rents all around the market.
I mean, the problem is nobody quite knows how to solve this issue. I mean, the only real way to solve it is to build more homes. That's where you get back to Paul's point about supply and demand. As I said, the landlords have the upper hand because there's a massive shortage of properties. They can drive up the prices because they know it's an extraordinarily competitive market, and the only way to ease that pressure in the long run is to build more affordable homes, and that means more social housing, and that means giving people the chance to get back on the property ladder as well. And at the moment, none of those things are happening.
And also, of course, making the economy grow for more than just private landlords so that people can actually afford to pay what needs to be paid. Now, Hunt's defence, as we've said, is that he doesn't really have a defence, but all the profits go to charity. But his spokesman was unable to say how much went to charity, which charities or charities it went to, or when that actually happened, which makes me wonder how much of the profits of that particular company were, for example, offset against expenses or tax or something else. And I suspect that may be part two of the Led by Donkeys investigation. It's certainly where I'll be sniffing next. And Jason, very quickly before we move on to good news, is this going to follow him around? Because he's about to have an autumn statement. He's going to be making policy announcements about that's going to affect landlords, that's going to affect inflation, things like this. Are other journalists, you think, going to hound him on this as he should? Because we get an awful, usually good opportunity to interview a chancellor around the time of an autumn statement, but we seem to be getting lots and lots of pull clips these days where they say something and it just goes out and they don't really ever get questioned on it.
And I think they have something to hide. I mean, scrutiny is always hard. I mean, the thing is that, you know, as he's got the autumn statement, that will take all the wind out of this story and he'll try and use it as cover. But it may come back. It's more, in many ways, it's about the perception. It feeds into this narrative of a cabinet of you know, a chancellor and a prime minister who are both multimillionaires, not entirely understanding what life is like for the majority of people in this country.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's anybody in the cabinet who's probably not a millionaire. Maybe one or two whose houses are worth slightly less than $1 million. But generally speaking, I think looking at some very rich people. Wouldn't it be nice if it was someone from, you know, just anywhere in the country that didn't have £1 million houses who would like to run the government? Now, thank you for that, Jason. Thank you everyone for taking part. Now, we have found some good news for you in the world, and it's jolly. And here it is. Now, when the Brexit mastermind, if that's what we can call him, Nigel Farage, went into the I'm a Celebrity jungle, there may have been many of us, and I suspect Jason might be one of them, despairing that an attention deficit junkie was demanding and getting eyeballs and earlugs so he could keep on talking tripe on primetime TV, where his appeal seems to be vastly magnified compared to his popularity at the ballot box. But the good news is the public have done absolutely the right thing, although there are many trials in the jungle which Farage can't do because of his bad back that comes from a plane crash, as it says there in the copies. Sick note, Farage will be ducking out some of them. The very first test is an eating trial, and the public have voted him into it in their millions. We all know what that involves: kangaroo testicles, cockroach cocktails, spider stew, lots of lovely stuff. And I can't imagine anybody would want to eat it more. Jason, is this any better possible news than Nigel Farage actually having to eat some bollocks rather than just talk it for once?
I'm really worried about this, Susie. I'm worried. Well, I feel bad for things he has to eat, because nobody wants to be eaten by him. But I feel bad, but I'm worried. But people might like him. There's always a danger of these programs that the public actually end up going, "Oh, he's all right, isn't he?" And that's exactly what he wants.
Yeah,
and
we
we're
have
not about his whole views, and we're not going to know about his kind of the fact he's kind of made kind of anti-Semitic tropes on numerous occasions, and the fact that he's an horrific apology for the worst successes of Donald Trump, and the fact he kind of stirs up xenophobia and hatred, and all of those things are going to get washed away because they're going, "Oh, he's all right, he's quite good egg, he's eating a testicle," and that's a bit which worries me.
Possibly, but of course we've had Matt Hancock on there last year, and he did quite well in terms of the format and the program, and he seemed a bit more human, and he managed to get on with the trials and so on. But he still got punched in the face on SAS Who Dares Wins, and he's still widely loathed. I suspect this could just be the end of a decline almost for Farage. Once he goes on here, it's usually a sign that you're desperate for attention and not getting any anywhere else.
Or desperate for money. I mean,
well, he's been debanked, hasn't he? Maybe he wants the 1.5 million he's reportedly getting for this, so he goes back over the Coots wealth limit and he can get an account there again.
Yeah, but that's these are the toughest elections ever, because they're so hard to read on the celebrity elections.
You never know who's going to come through it to be a winner. I would never have picked Tony Blackburn all those years ago, but there we are. It happened. We'll have to see how things pan out there, won't we? But I should be tuning in tonight and watching Nigel chow down on some testicles, because what the hell else would I do with my evening?
England versus Macedonia.
It seems like a very good idea to me. Thank you for taking us through that, Jason. Thank you everyone for taking part. I hope all your children are safe in school today, and that we all get through the autumn statement, which of course I think is Wednesday, isn't it, Jason? So the same week that it's revealed Jeremy Hunt has managed to make 18% profit on his flats, maybe he's going to give us all 18% extra cash as well. We'll see, won't we? Thank you everyone for taking part. We'll see you all again on Wednesday for a look forward at the autumn statement and what's going to happen to your finances. Till then, everybody, stay safe. Tatty bye.